or maybe not. Anywho, so we're preparing to Zoom, and I think you're good to go, Rabbi Katz. And let me mute everybody.
Sorry, one more last minute thing. It's Boker Tov and Shabbat Shalom. I don't have a link to the usual Siddur we have, but I happen to have a link to Lev Shalem if you want me to put that in the comments, unless someone has the other one handy as a PDF. One of the few things we didn't think of at the time.
I don't have it as a PDF, but I think I have a link to this one that we're okay. It's spotlighted on Rabbi Katz, so you can't see me, but it's the Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals.
Okay, yeah, if you've got that, you can pop it in. Thank you.
Comments, and I will also put the page numbers for that in the chat, so people have it. Paste. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm really happy that we are here together and doing our first what do you call it? Like not trial, but like stepping into doing Saturday morning services all together. This has been something that an incredible amount of people have put a lot of energy into figuring out how to make happen in a way that both aligns with halacha as we understand it at Chavrei, and in a way that fits with the Chavrei feel. And so we, yeah, it's just been an incredible balancing act and a lot to like learn and a lot to think through. And we are excited to see where we're at with this and to hear what you all think about it. Please stay for Kiddush so we could talk about that. And as well as like the membership committee did this incredible thing of asking for good news in the community this week to share with each other. And so please also stay for Kiddush to hear about the good things that are going on in people's lives and share and congratulate both Nathan and Doris and Avram on his bar mitzvah last week, and tons of people have birthdays, and there's just I think Aya did some really great parallel parking. There's just like a lot of really wonderful things to hear about, so please stay and chat with us afterwards. Yeah, please just kind of roll with us through this experiment of a day, and let us know what you think and what pieces work and what pieces don't work. And I think the last thing I wanted to say is like acknowledging like the difficulty of just not having any solution that works perfectly for everyone right now, and like the sadness of like our folks who don't use electricity on Shabbat not being able to be with us, and knowing they're in our hearts, and we're working to have as many things meet as many people in the community as possible in as many different ways. So yeah, with that, Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom, welcome to Shabbat, Parshat Chayei Sarah. And Becky, thank you so much for leading Shacharit.
Okay, we'll start on page 106 if you have this book, and I think Jeannie also put a link in the chat, so thank you. Yishtabach Shimcha Le'ad Malkeinu.
Guys.
Brachot Kodot Me'atav Yad Olam Baruch Atah Adonai El Malchado Batishbachot El Ahodot Adonai Niflaot Habocher B'Shirei Zimra Melech Elchei HaOlamim Yikadav Yikadash Shemei Rabbah V'yamad Yifrak Yirtei V'yamlich Malchutei V'chayechon Yomechon Uchaye Zechol Beit Yisrael Bagala Bagala Uvizman Karib Bimeru Amen Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'alam Le'al Me'amaya Yitbarach Yitbarach, Vishtabach, Vidbar, Vitraman, Vitnase, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitala, Shmeda Kudesha, Brechu, Lelam and Kover Chata, Vishirata, Tushbechata, Venechemata, Dami Ran Biama, Vimeru, Amen. 107.
Stay standing for our
Baruch Hu At Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai Borach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch At Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Yotzer Orech Voshech Oseh Shalom Uvarei Et Hakol. En kerkecha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh v'inzulat chama kinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes b'techa golel limot HaMashiach ve'en domeh lecha Moshienu l'tchiyat hametim. Okay. We're going to go to page 108. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch u'mvorach befi kol neshama gadlo v'tuvo malei olam da'at u'tfuna sovevimoto Amika el chayot hakodesh v'nedar v'chavod al hamerkava zechu u'tumishor lifnei chiso Chesed v'rachamim lifnei chvodo Tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu Yitzaram b'dad b'bina u'paskel koach u'gvura Natan bahem liot moshlim b'karev tevel Maleim ziv u'mfikim noga na'esim b'mechol ha'olam Smechim b'tzeitam v'sasim b'voam Osim b'yem ha'retzon konam Per v'chavod notnim lishmot tzala v'rina Lezecher malchuto kara l'shemesh V'yizrach or ra'a v'hikim Zurat halvana Shevach notnim lo Kol tzeva marom Tiferet tu gedula Strafim be'ofanim be'chayot HaKodesh. 109. Le'ala shvish over here. $110. Kulam ahuvim, kulam brurim, kulam giburim, v'kulam osim be'ma'avira v'tzon konam, v'kulam potchim et pihem b'ktusha v'tahara, v'shira v'zimra, u'varchim u'shavchim u'farim, u'maritzim u'maktishim u'ma'amlichim, et shem ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol, ha'gibor v'anora, kadoshu, v'kulam v'kabimon, continue silently. Or chadash al tzion tair v'nizkech u'lam hera le'ro baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'meorot. 111. Ava rabba avtanu Adonai Eloheinu chem l'gdola v'tera chamalta aleinu Avinu malkeinu ba'avur avoteinu Shabbat chuvecha Avinu malkeinu ותלמדם חוקי חיים, כן תחננו תלמדנו, אבינו האב הרחמן, המרחם רחם עלינו, ותן בליבנו להבין ולהשכיל לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך ויבה, והערננו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם השחר הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום ארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו מקומיות לארצנו, כי על פועל ישועות אתה, ובנו בחרת מקום ולשון וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת, להודות לך ליחך באהבה, ברוך אתה אדוני, בוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. 112 for Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך ושכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, ובטחתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Adonai Elohechem emet. Lidor vado hu kayam u'shmo kayam v'chison achon malchuto v'emunato le'ad kayamet. Emet shatahu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu malkeinu malch avotenu go'aleinu go'al avotenu yotzreinu tzrei yeshuatenu podenu matzilenu me'olam shemacha ein Elohim zulatecha. 114. Ezra tavotenu atahu me'olam. Tehilot Elohim Baruch Hu Barach Moshe B'nai Yisrael L'chanu Shira V'simcha Rabba V'yirvu Chulam Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai Mi Chamocha Nedar B'Kodesh Nora Tehilot Osef Eleh Shira Chadasha Shimchu Gilim L'Shimcha Sfat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hodu V'imlichu V'amru Adonai Imloch Le'olam Va'ed Tzur Yisrael Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael Uvdei Chimel Yisrael. Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzvaot Shemu, Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch Adonai, Gal Yisrael. We'll start the Amidah together on page 115b. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanara, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Koneh Hakol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot, U'Mevi Goel L'fnei B'neihem, L'man Shemo V'Yahava, Melech Ozer Ufoked Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Abraham Ufoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayim Metim Atah Rav Le'Yoshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechayim Metim B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Berofeh Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Bal Geburot, Umidom Melach, Melech Mimit Umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah l'hachayot metim, Baruch atah Adonai, mechayei hametim. Kakatu v'yadu v'yacha, v'kara ze el ze v'yamar,
Kadosh, 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 Adonai.
Melech kol haaretz kevodo, az b'kol rash gadol, adir v'chazak mashmim kol, midnasim l'matzrafim, l'motam baruch yomeru, baruch
Adonai, mein Kamar.
Bimkomcha malkeinu tofia, v'timlach aleinu, k'mechakim anachnu lach, matai timlach b'tzion, v'karov b'yameinu, le'olam va'ed tishkon, tikadal v'tikadash, v'toch Yerushalayim ercha, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לנצח נצחים, בעינינו תירנה, תירנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך, בעינינו תירנה, תירנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך. Hayedei, David, Hayedei, David, Hayedei, David, Mashiach Tzidkecha, Yimloch Adonai Le'olam, Elohayach Zion, Ledor Vador, Hallelujah. Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagi Gad Lecha. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, nagi gad lecha. Ulenetzach netzachim, ulenetzach netzachim, kedushacha, kedushacha nakdish. V'shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush le'olam va'ed. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, nagi gad lecha. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, nagi gad lecha. Ki el melech gadol, gadol v'kadosh, gadol v'kadosh atah. Ki el melech gadol, gadol v'kadosh, gadol v'kadosh atah. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh.
We continue silently till page 120.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, imru, amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Page 138 for Kaddish Shalem. Yikara Shemei Rabba.
Amen.
Yamadi Rakirte v'yamlech machute v'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayach Beit Yisrael b'agalav yisman karev v'imru. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba mevorach li'olam li'ol maya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramon v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitala v'yitala shmei kudusha. Le'olam min kol berachata v'shirata tishmachata v'nachamata damiram b'yama v'imeru.
Amen.
Yikabal tzorhon v'avuchon d'chai Yisrael kadam avuchon v'bishmai v'imeru.
Amen.
Yeshlam Rabba min Shemai v'chaim v'lenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru.
Amen.
Yasher Koach to Becky. Thank you so much.
Rochtia.
So, being unable to gather together around a Torah scroll today, we have a modified Torah service where we'll be reading out of our either Chumash, or if somebody has a Tikkun, people are reading out of Tikkunim, and instead of having, and because we can't actually like touch the Torah and do full aliyot, we are doing what we're calling Zoom liot, where we are breaking up the aliyot as they would be broken up otherwise, and there'll be somebody who has an honor for each of them, where they'll say the blessings for studying Torah before and after. So that's kind of how the Torah service is going to work. Before we start the Torah service, I would like to give a Torah introduction, as is our custom. And I'm very excited that Nathan will be giving our Devar Torah after our Torah reading. But to begin, this week's Torah portion is called Chaye Sarah, which is a little of a misleading title if you take it out of context. This is a lesson in reading to the end of a sentence, because the words Chaye Sarah mean the life of Sarah. But if you stop there, you would think this Parsha might be about Sarah's life, but the full context of the sentence is V'yu Chaye Sarah 100 shana ve'esrim shana v'sheva shanim shnei chaye Sarah. The life of Sarah was 127 years. And the next sentence goes on to tell us about her death. So can't just stick with the first two words of the Parsha and assume you know what it's going to be about. This Parsha comes at a really challenging moment in the book of Genesis, in our story. It's right after the binding of Isaac. And the fact that Sarah's death is the first thing that's mentioned right after this suggests that the near sacrifice of Isaac was not just traumatic for Isaac and potentially for Abraham, but for Sarah as well, and perhaps so traumatic that it caused her death. My teacher, Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein, points out that after that scene, after the binding of Isaac, none of the principal characters in the family, Abraham, Sarah, or Isaac, ever speak to each other again. And so we're sort of left with this image of an estranged and splintered family. And actually, at this moment, all three of them seem to be in separate locations, because at the end of last week's Parsha, we read that Abraham returned with his assistants and settled in Beersheba. Meanwhile, here we read that Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Isaac, we read the next time we hear from him is right before he meets his future wife, Rivka. The Torah tells us Yitzchak, meanwhile, had come back from the land of Be'er Lahai Roi. And this place, Be'er Lahai Roi, is mentioned only once before. This was the place where God had spoken to and supported Isaac's stepmother, Hagar, after Sarai and Abram had banished her from the house. And she'd been, that's where she had been crying, and God told her that she was going to have a son. Be'er Lahai Roi can be translated to the well of the living one who sees me. Let me say that again. I think I said it a little fast. Be'er meaning well, Lahai meaning living, and Roi meaning seeing. So together the name of this place can be well of the living one who sees me. And from those two scenes, this moment where Hagar has this conversation, this hopeful conversation with God, and also this moment where this is the place where Isaac's kind of life goes from ending to starting again. This seems to be a site of hope for the downtrodden, for the evicted, for the refugee. And there's a midrash that teaches that here in this place, in Be'er Lahai Roi, it's from Bereshit Rabbah, Yitzchak actually encounters Hagar at that place. And when he is there, he sees Hagar and he actually brings her back to Abraham after the death of Sarah. In this tradition, Abraham's second wife, who is known in the text itself as she's called Keturah, but there's this rabbinic tradition of thinking that Keturah and Hagar are the same person. And so the image is that Isaac is actually bringing Hagar back to Abraham to reunite after Sarai's death. Meanwhile, we also know that this is the same parsha where Abraham is finding a wife for Isaac. So we have this scene where father and son aren't speaking to each other, but they're each trying to do some chesed, do some kindness for the other by finding a love partner. Abraham finding Rivka for Isaac, and Isaac reuniting Abraham with Hagar. And then we end the parsha with a different reconciliation. We read, when Abraham had breathed his last, dying at a ripe, happy old age, old and full of years, he was gathered to his kin. His sons Yitzchak and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah. His sons Yitzchak and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah. So Isaac and Ishmael are coming back together. You could imagine that, okay, this sometimes happens when people die. There's not necessarily a reconciliation, but people come back together because, for the sake of the person who's died. It could be a more begrudging coming together. But instead, actually, we read next, it happened after the death of Abraham that God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lahai Roi. So it seems that despite all of these difficulties, these brothers who both had these lives of tremendous amounts of strife, who might have carried that with one another and are, according to the archetypes in Genesis, supposed to be in a rivalry with each other, instead settle down with one another. This is very noteworthy. Before this story, we have the lethal rivalry between Cain and Abel. We have the not so amicable split between Abraham and Lot. Later, we're going to have all of the tension between Jacob and Esau, Rachel and Leah, Joseph and his brothers. By contrast, Isaac and Ishmael are giving us this portrait of going from being deep rivals to overcoming that and settling it together after an ancient feud. To me, this offers an image of hope and a prayer that suffering and pain and old difficulties and old conflicts don't have to lead to further hostility and further vengeance over and over and again, but instead, perhaps through Isaac's pain and through Ishmael's pain, they've been able to find some space for empathy, some compassion, and reconciliation. And my hope is that their memory continues to guide us in finding means of growing compassion and reconciliation through the many conflicts and sufferings and pains that can too often cause people to split apart. Instead, may we find opportunities to be like Isaac and Ishmael and return to this place like Be'er Lachai Ro'i, a place that is a well of living and of seeing. So maybe God's will. So our first Torah reading will be from chapter 24 and start at verse 10. Erwin will be chanting, and the first Zumlia will go to Alan Cohen.
Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishames v'tovatzivanu la'aseh b'divrei Torah v'ha'arif no Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratecha b'finu u'fafi amachol beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'se'eso'enu v'se'eso'ei amachol beit Yisrael kulanu yod'ei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha l'shmo Baruch atah Amen.
Vayikach ha'eved asara gmalim migmalei Adonav vayelech b'chol tuv Adonav b'yado vayakam vayelech el aram naharayim el ir nachor vayavrech hagmalim michutz la'ir el be'er hamayim Le'eit erev, le'eit tzeit hashoavaot, vayomar Adonai, Elohei Adoni Avraham, hakrena lefanai hayom, v'asei chesed im Adoni Avraham, hinei anochi nitzav al ein hamayim, Uvnot anshei ha'ir yotzot lishav ma'ayim v'haya ha'na'ara asher omar eleha hatina chadech v'eshte v'amara shetei v'gam gemalecha ashke ota hochachta la'abdecha liyitzchak v'va'eda ki asita chesed im Adoni.
Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'rakar banu mikol hamim v'notan lanu Torato Baruch atah noten haTorah.
Amen.
Alan, thank you for your many years of service as the head of the ritual committee. Our next Zumya goes to Avram Weiss, who had his bar mitzvah last 2 weeks ago, and we'll hopefully be able to give you a full aliyah next year. But we're very excited to be able to honor you at our first Saturday morning service. So I'm going to call you up with a special vocalization for bar mitzvah, even though it's your technical bar mitzvah will be next year. Yamod, Yamod, Yamod. Avraham Natan ben Aviva vayakir hakohen.
English? Yeah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, who rules the universe, instilling us in the holiness of mitzvot by commanding us to study words of Torah. May the words of Torah, Adonai our God, be sweet in our mouths, and in the mouths of all your people, so that we, our children, and all the children of the house of Israel, may come to love you and to study your Torah on its own merit. Praised are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people Israel.
Amen. Vayehu terem kila ledaber v'nei Rivka yotzeit asher yulda livtuel ben Milka eshet Nachor achi Abraham v'chada al shichma v'hana'ara tovat marat me'od betula v'ish lo yida'a v'teired ha'ayna Vat malei chada, vata'al, vayaratza eved likrata, vayamer, agmi inina, me'ad mayim mikadech, vatomer shtei adoni, vatmaher, vatored kada, al yada vatashkehu, vatchal lahashkotahu, vatomer, gam ligmalecha eshav, Ad im kilu lishtot vatmaher vatar kada al hashoket vatarat od el habe'er lishov vatishav lechol gimalav.
Praised are you, Adonai our God, who rules the universe, choosing us from among all people by giving us his Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah.
Thank you. Yasher Koach Avram and Erwin. Our last Aliyah today, our Zoom Aliyah today goes to Nathan and Doris in honor of their upcoming wedding. And we're so excited for you. I'm also going to call you up with the special chanting for Simchas. Yamdu, yamdu, yamdu. Et hakala Debra bat Abraham v'Sara v'hachatan Nachum ben Moshe v'Chana.
That's our cue, right?
That's
Okay.
your cue.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'asuk b'divrei Torah.
May the words of Torah, Adonai our God, be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of all your people, so that we, our children, and all the children of the house of Israel may come to love you and to study your Torah on its own merit. Praised are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to God's people, Israel.
Amen. V'ha'ish mishta'el lach, macharish lada'at, hahitzliach Adonai, darko imlo, vayehi kasher kil'u hagamalim lishtot, vayikach ha'ish nezem zahav, bekamish kalo, u'shnei tzmidim ayadeha, Asara zahav mishkalam, vayomer bat mi'at, hagidi nali, hayesh beit avich, makom lanu lalein, vatomer elav, bat betuel anochi, bin milka, asher yada lenachor, vatomer elav gam teven, gam mispot, rav imanu, gam akom laleun, vayikot ha'ish, vayishtachu l'Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Doris and Nathan. Well, actually, Avram, this is a little bit to you as well. So there's a teaching that the way that mitzvot sort of work in Judaism is like the more your capacity is, the more you are obligated in. So that's part of why as you get older and when you have a bar mitzvah, part and what comes with that is larger obligations. And that's why the celebration is also having more responsibility, and also with that responsibility coming a greater sense of connection. And so too, also with a marriage, there's a teaching that you also grow, you also increase, and with that comes a greater obligations, but also a greater connection. And Doris and Nathan, I feel like you have modeled this so well as your relationship has grown, your connection to the synagogue and to Judaism and the amount of Torah that I've gotten to share with each of you through this time and getting to know each of you has just grown and grown. And my hope is that as your relationship continues to deepen, and as I'm just looking around and seeing all of your family who are here too, that all of your family is also is joining with us and becoming part of this greater connection, and this greater connection both to community and to Judaism. And looking specifically at this Torah portion, we see how family connections aren't uncomplicated, but it is a Torah portion that is ultimately about coming together and is about finding ways of overcoming complicatedness in families, and finding ways to bridge and find compassion and find empathy and find greater ways to connect both internally and also to your external community. And so I hope that the love story of Rebecca and Isaac, where they see each other and, Rebecca falls off of her camel. She's so shocked and so delighted. You hold on to some of that kind of energy, as well as this deep, intense energy that Isaac brings of he comes to this moment from being out studying, being very serious in the field, being very dedicated. So both this kind of the way that Torah can both be this thing that kind of is astonishing and throws us off in these really beautiful moments, these life cycle moments, and also provides this studying undercurrent, this thing that we're constantly engaging in. My hope is that both of you, that Torah will continue to play both of those roles in your lives and the lives of your family. With that, I will say the blessing for the official Ephraim blessing. Give me 1 second. Misha berach avotin Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah, hu yivarech et hachatan, Nachum ben Moshe v'Chana v'et hachala, Deborah bat Abraham b'Sara, asher b'karav yikansu la'chuppah, Ve'alu hayom lichvod ha'makom v'lichvod ha'Torah v'lichvod ha'Shabbat. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yadrichem livnot bayit b'Yisrael asher bo yishkanu ahava ve'achva shalom v'reut v'yishlach bracha v'shalacha b'chol ma'aseh yadehem v'nomar Amen. May God, who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless the Chatan, Nathan, and the Kala, Doris, soon to be joined under the Chuppah, who have been called together to the Torah with reverence for God, the Torah, and Shabbat. May the Holy One help them to build a Jewish home filled with love and harmony, peace and companionship. May God bring them fulfillment in all their worthy endeavors. And let us say, Amen. I invite everyone to unmute yourselves for a second and just shout a Mazel Tov.
Mazel tov!
Mazel tov! Mazel tov!
Mazel tov.
Mazel
Mazel
tov!
Tov and Mazel Tov and Mazel Tov. Dinner Tov and Mazel
Hold
Tov.
on, only one person.
Yeah, hey, Lanu, yeah, hey, Lanu.
There he is.
All right, we tried. One pass it off to one family to sing. Goldings, you want to take it?
Oh, wow.
Great.
Simon Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Simon Tov, Simon Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Simon Tov, Simon Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Simon Tov, Yelanu, Yelanu, Lecha Yisrael. Yelanu, Yelanu, Lecha Yisrael. Yelanu, Yelanu, Lecha Yisrael. Yelanu, Yelanu, Lecha Yisrael.
You look good, Dan.
Wish we could throw lots of candy at you. Doing the best we can. Like Jeannie, you have great dance moves. With that, Nathan, the floor goes to you for the Devar Torah.
Okay, and now for a complete change of pace. Chaya Sarah, the life of Sarah, is bookended by the death of Sarah and the death of Abraham. That juxtaposition is important, and Sarah's death seems to spur Abraham to action. After the text reports Sarah's death and that her husband mourned for and bewailed her, there is the story in detail of how Abraham came to buy the cave at Machpelah. Curiously, there is a detailed public conversation back and forth between Abraham and his neighbors, showing Abraham understood what was meant, which was beyond what was said. I am a resident alien among you, he says. Sell me a burial site among you that I may remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, hear us, my lord. You are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. Thereupon Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the Hittites, and he said to them, if it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, son of Zohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst. Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all who entered the gate of his town, saying, no, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed low before the people of the land and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, if only you would hear me out, let me pay the price of the land. Accept it from me that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying, my lord, do hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate. So Ephron's land in Machpelah, near Mamre, the field with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of that field, passed to Abraham as his possession, in the presence of the Hittites, of all who entered the gate of his town. And then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. Now, I have sometimes wondered what might have happened if Abraham grabbed the bargain that some people might have heard being offered in verse 11, when Ephron says, I give you the field and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people, bury your dead. Free? Excellent. The cave and the field, no charge? You guys are so kind. Moments later, Ephron mentions his price as if in passing. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? But it was important for Abraham to understand what was meant so he could live at peace with his neighbors. The back and forth of the discussion was what led to the understanding among the people. What happens next in the parasha is the story of Abraham's project to get his son Isaac married. There is a tremendous amount of detail and some word-for-word repetition, almost like a fairy tale. Repetition is key in some of those stories, as in, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin, said 3 times in the 3 Little Pigs story. The story of Eliezer returning to Abraham's homeland to find a wife for Isaac is very significant in a number of ways. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed so recently, offered great insight into this parasha. This part is from Rabbi Sachs. Immediately after the story of the land purchase, we read, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and God had blessed Abraham with everything. Again, this sounds like the end of a life, not a preface to a new course of action. And again, our expectation is confounded. Abraham launches into a new initiative, this time to find a suitable wife for his son Isaac, who at this point is at least 37 years old. Abraham instructs his most trusted servant to, quote, go to my native land, to my birthplace, to find the appropriate woman. He wants Isaac to have a wife who will share his faith and way of life. As with the purchase of the field, this course of events is described in more detail than almost anywhere else in the Torah. Every conversational exchange is recorded. The contrast with the story of the binding of Isaac could not be greater. There, almost everything, Abraham's thoughts, Isaac's feelings, is left unsaid. Here, everything is said. Again, the literary style calls our attention to the significance of what is happening without telling us precisely what it is. The explanation, writes Rabbi Sachs, is simple and unexpected. Throughout the story of Abraham and Sarah, God promises them 2 things, children and a land. The promise of the land, rise, walk in the land throughout its length and breadth, for I will give it to you, is repeated no less than 7 times. The promise of children occurs 4 times. Abraham's descendants will be, quote, a great nation, as many as the dust of the earth and the stars in the sky. He will be he will be the father not of one nation, but of many. Despite this, when Sarah dies, Abraham has not a single inch of land that he can call his own. And he has only one child who will continue the covenant, Isaac, currently unmarried. Neither promise has been fulfilled. Hence, the extraordinary detail of the 2 main stories in Chayei Sarah, the purchase of the land and the finding of a wife for Isaac. There is a moral here, and the Torah slows down the speed of the narrative as it speeds up the action so that we will not miss the point. And the point is, God promises, but we have to act. God promised Abraham the land, but he had to buy the first field. God promised Abraham many descendants, but Abraham had to ensure that his son was married and to a woman who would share the life of the covenant, so that Abraham would have, as we say today, Jewish grandchildren. Despite all the promises, God does not and will not do it alone. By the very act of self-limitation, tzimtzum, through which God created the space for human freedom, God gives us responsibility. And only by exercising responsibility do we reach our full stature as human beings. God saved Noah from the flood, but Noah had to make the ark. God gave the land of Israel to the people, Israel, but they had to fight the battles. God gives us the strength to act, but we have to do the deed. What changes the world, what fulfills our destiny, is not what God does for us, says Rabbi Sachs, but what we do for God. So this part's me. Rabbi Sachs's observation about our necessary partnership with God reminds me of a grim joke that's a favorite of mine. A man of faith was in his home, threatened by an imminent hurricane and flood. A policeman came and banged on his door and told him he should evacuate right away. The man laughed and said confidently that God would save him. As the waters rose and his home filled with water, he fled to the second floor. Soon, a neighbor came by in his boat, urging the man to get into the boat and move to safe, higher ground. Shouting over the wind and the rain, the man declared he would stay in his house until God saved him. The waters continued to rise, and the man went onto the roof of his house. A National Guard helicopter lowered a rope ladder, and a brave guardsman demanded the man climb onto the ladder. "I will stay here," he shouted. "God will save me." It was soon after that that the man drowned. When the man met God in heaven, he said to God, "Why didn't you save me?" And God answered the man, "I sent a policeman to your door, the neighbor in the boat to your window, and the guardsman in a helicopter to your rooftop. It was up to you to do your part." Rabbi Sachs's deep observation is that Abraham had to work with God on realizing God's promise to Abraham regarding both the land and his descendants. The back and forth of the work that both God and people must do is echoed in the back and forth conversation between Abraham and the Hittites, as well as in the repetition in Eliezer's journey to find Rebekah. It's even there in the bargain that Eliezer prayed for, that the right woman would be the one who would share water from her jug with him and also offer to water all of his camels. As he finished this thought, Rebekah showed up, beautiful, and said all the words he prayed that she might say, proving her worth and God's choice at the same time. But God didn't force Rebekah to offer water to the camels. That was her practice and her nature to be welcoming, demonstrating her free will, and that action made her a partner in God's plan. Getting Isaac and Rebekah married was the last recorded work Abraham did as God's partner. Chapter 25, verse 8 reports that Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good ripe age, old and contented. Now his family is on track to produce Jacob, who becomes Israel, the one who struggles with God. And that struggle is the subject of a different devar. For example, if the binding of Isaac was a test of Abraham's faith, did he pass or did he fail? The answer might be yes. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Yasher Koach. If you didn't think you had enough to talk about at Kiddush, now you have even more. Thank you so much. Now Jeannie is going to lead us in the prayer for healing. So I invite you to kind of take a second, shift brain spaces, and call to mind the folks who are in your heart who are in need of healing, and hold those in mind while Jeannie sings to us. Thank you, Jeannie. And family.
Yeah, they're in the background. Ready? Mishe berach avotenu mikor habracha leimotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Thank you. Now Nathan and Doris will lead us in the prayer for the country, and following that, Alan will lead us in the prayer for those serving our country.
Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and advisors, and for all who exercise just and rightful authority. Teach them insights from your Torah, that they may administer all affairs of state fairly, that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may forever abide in our midst. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds form a common bond in true harmony, to banish hatred and bigotry, and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country. May this land, under your providence, be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen.
Our God and God of our ancestors, protect the men and women who serve in our armed forces, together with all innocent persons, regardless of nationality, who are endangered by war. Guide those who serve our country in foreign lands to act with the highest standards of justice and humanity. May our servicemen and servicewomen who are separated from their loved ones speedily return to the arms of the ones who love them, whole in both body and spirit, and may our country and the world know only peace.
Thank you both. So before we conclude our Torah service, I want to make an informal announcement that the new month is starting this month. We begin our new month on Tuesday. We are beginning the month of Kislev. So hope you're getting ready for Hanukkah. Only have another 30 days or so to prepare. I'll just read this bit in English. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, to awaken us in joy and blessing in the month ahead. Grant us a long life, a peaceful life with goodness and blessing, sustenance and physical vitality, a life of reverence and piety, a life free from shame and reproach, a life of abundance and honor, a reverent life guided by the love of Torah, a life in which our worthy aspirations will be fulfilled. And let us say, Amen. For the conclusion of the Torah service, we will chant Eitz Chaim Hi together. And this is either Natan or the Glazers.
Glazers are ready to go.
Great.
Okay. I see the Goldings. You're cool with that? Okay. You guys ready? Yeah. Here. Ready? Eitz Chaim Hi lamachazikim ba v'tzomcheha me'ushar teracheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha benashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem.
And now we give the spotlight to Jeff, who will lead us in the Musaf service.
Okay, we're going to start on page 155 with the Chatzi Kaddish. Yiskara v'yiskara shemei Rabbah. Oma divrachir zevi amlik malchuse. B'chayei konav yomechon u'chaydecho beis Yisrael. B'golav izman kari v'yimaru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach. Li'olam olamei ha'gah. Yisparach. Yisparach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yisram v'yisnaseh. V'yisadar v'yisalev v'yisalosh shemedi kudeshah. Tulu Elohim kol v'yachasa v'shirasa tushkachasa v'nechemasa Damiran Biamavi Yimaru. Amen. Okay, we will start the Musaf Shemana Esrei on the page 156 of your choice. We'll say it together through Kedusha. Then you'll say it silently the rest of the way through the word Kadmonios. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoseinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah El Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanorah El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol v'Zocher Chastei Avos U'Mevi Goel Livnei V'Neihem V'Man Shemo B'Yavo Melech Arzu for Kedem Kshia Umogen. Baruch atah Adonai Mogen Avraham Uvoked Sarah. Atagi Barli Elam Adonai Mechayim Misimat Torah V'Hoshia. Ashiv Ruach Umarida Gashem. Mechakel Chayim B'Chesed. Mechayim Mesim B'Rachamim Rabim. So Mech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim. Umatir Rasurim, Umakayem, Munoso, Lichene Afar, Michal Mocha Baal Guvuros, Umidom Elach, Melech Mimi, Sumakaye, Umatzmiak Yeshua, Vanemon Atalach Ayos Mesim, Baruch atah Adonai, L'chaye hamesim. Aritzecha v'nakdishecha k'sotziach sarfei kodesh hamakdishim shimcha b'kodesh k'kosuv al yad neviyecha v'kara ze'el Amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzavos Melech haaretz Kavodo Kavodo Malei Olam Kavodo Malei Olam Kavodo Malei Olam Kavodo Malei Olam Mishar Sov Shoalim Zeh Lazeh Mishar Sov Shoalim Zeh Lazeh Ayim Makom Kavodo Liumazam Baruch Yameru Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo Hu Yifen Barachamim V'Yachonam Ham Yachadim Shemo Erev Avoker B'chol Yom Tamid Pamayim B'Yahava Shema Omrim Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Hu Eloheinu Hu Avinu Hu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu V'hu Yashmienu V'rachamov Shenis V'rachamov Shenis Li'enei kol chai Lios lachem lachem le'Elohim Lios lachem le'Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem U'divrei kodshecha kasuv le'mar
Yimlech Le'elam Ha'etzion L'Davador
Baruch
L'Liyah.
Adonai Le'olam Elohai Tzion L'Davador Hallelujah L'Davador Nagid God Lecha U'netzach Nitzavim Krishos V'Naktish V'shivchacho Elenu L'Pim L'Yom Yishli L'Moed Ki Amelech Gadol V'Kadosh Atah Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh
Amen.
Top of page 159. Yismachu v'malachu secha shoimrei 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 Shabbos v'korei oneg Shabbos. Yismachu v'malachu secha shoimrei 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 Shabbos v'korei oneg Shabbos. Aham mekadeshei mekadeshei shavi Shabbos. Kulam yismahu v'yisangu mituvecha Shabbos yismachu v'malachu secha shoimrei 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 Shabbos v'korei oneg Shabbos yismachu v'malachu secha shoimrei 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 Shabbos v'korei oneg Shabbos. V'hashvi ratzisavo v'kidashto Shabbos v'emda yamin o sokoros Shabbos yismachu v'malachu secha shoimrei 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 Shabbos v'korei oneg Shabbos yismachu v'malachu secha shoimrei 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 Shabbos v'korei oneg Shabbos. Full Kaddish, page 181. Yiskara v'yiskara shemei Rabbah B'yom divrochi rusei v'yamlik malchusei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayel v'beis Yisrael v'agol v'yizman kore v'yimeru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mavara Ya'olam olam yamaya yisbarach yisbarach v'yishtabach yisbar v'yismam v'yisnaseh v'yisadar v'yisalev v'yisalav shemei kudashah Richoli elamim kol b'chazra v'shirasa tishv'chasa v'nechamasa adam yiram v'yama v'yimeru Amen. Tiskabel soloson uvoson u'cho Yisrael kadam avu andi v'shma v'yimeru Amen. Yesh lama rabba min shemaya v'chayim olenu v'yalko Yisrael v'yimeru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav u'yaseh shalom olenu v'yalko Yisrael v'yalko Yoshvei Sevel v'yimeru Amen. Page 182. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kamalkeinu, Ein Kamoshienu, Mi Eloheinu, Mi Kadonenu, Mi Kamalkeinu, Mi Kamoshienu. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shektiru Avosenu Lefanecha Eskatores Asami. Please rise for the Alenu. Alenu l'shabeach ladon hakol l'seis kedula liotzer bereshis shelo asanu koye haratzos velo samanu ishpachos adama shelo sam chalkenu kahem v'goralenu kapal hamonam v'anachnu koirim u'mishtachavim u'modim Lifnei melech malchei hamlochim hakadosh baruch hu shehu notei shomayim v'yosei haaretz hu moshav yikaro b'shomayim mimal u'shchinas uzo agav hei meromim hu Eloheinu einod emes malkeinu efes ulaso Kakasu, the Sorosu, Viadatayum, Hashemosa, Elavavaha, Ki Adonai, Hu Elohim, Vashomayim Mimal, Vial Haaretz, Mitach Hasenod, Einod, okay. Akasu v'sorosecha Adonai yimlok tilam v'ed v'nemar v'hoyo Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
This week we mark the following yard sites. Al Weiss, the father of Eddie Weiss, Florence Morris, mother of Debbie Cohen, and Gerald A. Josselson, father of Tracy Josselson. Morris Kaddish is on page 184. Yit Gadal, Yit Gadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Alma Divrach Yirte Yamlich Machute Dechayechon Uvyomechon Uchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Davala Uvizman Kariv Vimru Amen.
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 Yehi Shmei Rabba Megora
Amen.
Yitbarach Vishtabach Vitpa'ar Vitromam Vitnase Vitadar Vidala Vitalo Shmei de Kudusha Brechol Le'ela Minkol Berchata Vashirata Tush Bechata V'Nechamata Amiram Belma Vimru Amen. Yehi Shlam Araba Min Shemaya V'Chaim Aleinu V'Kol Yisrael Vimru Amen.
Amen.
Osa Shalom B'Ramav Hu Yasa Shalom Aleinu V'Kol Yisrael V'Kol Yoshvei Tevel Vimru
Amen.
Amen. Announcements.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today at our first Zoom Shabbat service. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jeannie Glazer. I am the Vice Chair of Hebrei Tzedek Congregation. And if this is your first time here, welcome. And thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you're here, and I hope that you stay and schmooze at the virtual Kiddush today. On behalf of the congregation, I want to wish Doris and Nathan a hearty mazel tov on your upcoming nuptials. And we have dedicated a chumash to mark the occasion. Ooh, suitable for framing. This is actually a stand-in for the real chumash because the real chumash is at Hebrei Tzedek, but I wanted everybody to see the beautiful nameplate that we made to commemorate the occasion. And I hope you don't hear my dog in the background making a ruckus. In any case, so I virtually present it to you, and I look forward to giving it to you in person when we're on the other side of this pandemic. I want to thank our service leaders and volunteers this week, Becky Perlman for leading Shacharit and for helping me with all the Zoom administration, Rabbi Katz for giving the Torah introduction and for facilitating today's services, Erwin Weiss and myself for laning today's Parsha, Alan Cohen, Avram Weiss, Doris Lefkowitz, and Nathan Rosen for stepping up to give our very first Zoom liaz or Zoom liot. Nathan for giving the Devar, and Jeff Amder for leading Musaf. Again, just thanks so much, Becky, for being my wing person behind the scenes to helping to monitor the Zoom and helping with the spotlighting and transitions. And thanks so much to Rabbi Katz and the members of the Ritual Committee and the Services Subcommittee for helping to plan and make this service possible. Please join us here tomorrow, here in the virtual sanctuary tomorrow for at 5 o'clock for a limud led by Naomi Hafter on Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, excuse me. And our next Shabbat service will be here in the virtual sanctuary this coming Friday, November 20th at 8 p.m. for Kabbalat Shabbat, Mariv, and the Devar. And with that, I hand the reins back over to Jeff for Adon Olam.
Okay, to commemorate a couple happy occasions, our first shul together and for a Shabbos in quite a while, and the impending wedding of Doris and Nathan. Let's do Adon Olam to the tune of Happy Days Are Here Again. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Le'ez Naso B'Chefetzo Kol Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra Ve'acharei Kichlos HaKol Levado Yimlok Nora V'hu Hoya V'hu Hoveh V'hu Yiheh B'Sifara Vahu achad v'yed sheni laham shilo lahak bira b'li reichis b'li saklis v'lo ha'od v'hamizra v'chaygo ali v'tzor kebli v'esara v'hu nisi u'manosli v'naskasi b'yom ekra v'yado afkid ruchi v'esishan v'yahira V'im ruchi gaviasi Adonai livalo ira. As they say in Balmer, Shabbat Shalom, hon.
It's amazing, amazing choice of tunes. Thank you so much. So yes, please stay with us for Kiddush. Not just me saying the blessing for Kiddush, but like the schmoozing part of Kiddush. I'm on page 315 in this book. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'zaratam berit olam. B'nei b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'zaratam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'zaratam berit olam. V'bayom hashvi Shabbat vayinapash, Shabbat vayinapash, Shabbat vayinapash. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'zaratam berit olam. V'achor et yom ha-Shabbat le'kadsho, sheshet yamim tavot v'asita kol melatecha, v'yom hashvi Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha. Lo taseh kol melacha ata l'bimcha l'bitcha avdecha b'amadcha l'bemtecha b'gercha asher b'sharecha. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz et hayam ve'kol asher bam v'yanach v'yom hashvi'i. Al ken be'rach Adonai et yom haShabbat v'yikadshehu. V'avri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei b'riah galafen.
Amen.
Okay, so our thought for Kiddush is to split